You were against the idea from the very beginning. Spirits and ghosts were not something to be messed with. You had watched enough horror movies to know that. Come on, Effin, don't tell me you're scared of a couple empty halls, Anya teased as she dragged you closer to the gate. Tall spikes of pure iron lined the perimeter of the abandoned shrine, rusted in some parts but still sharp, acting as a deterrent to keep unwelcomed guests out. They rose menacingly into the cloudy night sky, too high to be able to jump or any sane person to climb, while light from the full moon reflected off the inky surface of the metal. But leave it to your friends to find the only gap in the otherwise impenetrable wall, and of course they wanted to investigate the supposedly haunted shrine on Halloween, going on and on about the novelty of it and how you would get to see if the rumors about the wandering spirits were true or not. To be honest, you didn't care if they were true or not. The ghosts lived there, fine, no skin off your nose. As long as they stayed away from you, it was all fine. You didn't mess with them, and they didn't mess with you. Yet here you were, wrapped in a heavy overcoat and warm hat, and not by your own violation, that was for sure. When your friends had first told you about the plan a week prior, you had laughed in their faces, thinking that they had been joking, because come on, they were stupid, but they weren't that stupid, right? Apparently, they were. As they proceeded to tell you about the hole Jasuku had found the other night, and how they planned to sneak in on Halloween when the supposed spirits would be the most active. Immediately, you all tried to talk them out of it, pleading for them to have a shred of common sense. Your words fell deaf on their ears. They brushed away your concerns and gave you a choice: come with them or not. It didn't matter. They were going to go either way. And of course, like a fool, you decided to go with them, because as much as you hated the thought of messing around with spirits and magic, you weren't about to let your pea-brained friends go stomping around a potential dangerous house without someone there to look after them and be the voice of reason. That's how you found yourself crawling through a just barely big enough gap in the fencing, still grumbling as you followed your friends further across the grounds. You were already not a fan of the place. All the plants and greenery that had once flourished under the careful hands of pristiness and shrine maidens were withered, crunching under your feet and scratching against one another as the chilly breeze swept through the open courtyard. A lone tree that once spread its pink cherry blossoms every spring stood dead in the center, branches now bare and casting nothing but shadows across the cracked ground. Ponds that once held clear water and koi were filled with algae reeking of must, and the bridge you used to cross over them creaked with every step as a warning of its intentions to dump you into the murk below. The building itself wasn't in great shape either. The tiled roof had holes and rows that were completely missing, surely letting in all types of water and wild animals. The walls themselves were cracked, full of craters, and covered in mold, casting a stench of rot through the whole building and providing the inside with no shelter from the elements. Despite your obvious distaste for the place, your friends were beside themselves with excitement, chattering nonstop as they dragged you deeper and deeper, floor after floor, exploring the entire shrine. They seemed all too happy to ignore the blatant creepiness of the place, ranging from abandoned shrine rooms to the chimes that rang outside. More than once, you could have sworn you saw something move among the shadows, creeping along the walls after you, dragging your foot out of yet another hole creating in the rotting wood of the stairs as you climbed to the next floor. You couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was like something was following you the entire time, almost attached to your back and breathing down your neck. But no matter how many times you snapped your head around or looked into the reflections, there was nothing there. There was never anything there. It still did nothing to make you feel better. Ghosts didn't always show themselves to the people they were about to ruthlessly murder. No, they stalked them, waiting until their guard was down, and when they were separated from the group a heavy hand landed on your shoulder, causing you to jump and let out an embarrassingly high-pitched shriek. As you jumped away from what you thought was a ghostly killer, your eyes clenched shut, ready for whatever brutal punishment awaited you at the hands of the dead. Yet it never came. And when you opened your eyes, the only thing that greeted you was the faces of your amused friends and their snickers as they miserably failed to hold in their amusement. Geez, Effin, I never took you to be such a scaredy cat, Goryo laughed as he clutched his sides, tears running down his face. Miksa was right next to him in much of the same position, holding herself upright against the wall. Yeah, what happened to the I don't care what happens angst you were carrying around at school? You growled, marching past them into the next hall, not caring that you didn't know where you were going. Anything to get away from their taunts and smug faces. I never said I wanted to be killed, and even if I did, it wouldn't be by being ripped apart by some pissed-off monster just because my friends were looking for an adrenaline rush, you huffed, crossing your arms across your chest and trying to hide the flush of embarrassment that was quickly crawling up your face. Anya swaggered over to where you stood, still uneven from her laughing fit. Oh, come on now, she giggled, and placed a hand on your shoulder, shaking it gently. We're just trying to lighten the mood. Ever since we've gotten here, you've been so tense. I wonder why, you spoke through gritted teeth, sending a glare her way. In response, she simply put her hands up in surrender, walking back towards the others. Listen, there's only one more place we need to check out, and then we can go. Gyoro walked further down the hall, stopping in front of the very last door at the end. Looking over his shoulder at you, he smirked. Is that all right with you, scaredy cat? Huffing, you made your way over to the others. Let's just get this over with. Pushing the door open, it creaked in protest, revealing that it was obviously a room unlike any of the others. You all spread out, curiously checking over the room in your own ways. The walls were almost undamaged, and there were only a few places where water managed to drip through the ceiling. Moonlight streamed in through the one window on the far side of the room, illuminating the whole space. Scrolls and other small items littered the shelves, and crates filled with unseen oddities laid beneath them, and next to you rolled up futons. If you had to guess by the smell alone, you would guess they contain a majority of incense among other herbs and spices. In this very center sat what appears to be a small torii gate, simple in structure and standing just taller than you. The wood was its natural brown color, and hanging from the topmost bar was a piece of embroidered cloth. Taking a step closer, you saw that the word travel stood proudly in elegant kanji. Whoever had done this was clearly skilled. Not a single thread was out of place, and for it to have lasted this long and stay in such condition showed that the care that went into crafting it. In the middle of inspecting, Miksa wandered from where she had been previously, searching through some cabinets of old dishes. Seeing how focused you were on the material in front of you, she elbowed your side and suggestively lifted her brow. Think about a souvenir, eh? I thought you didn't like creepy things. Please, I wasn't going to touch it. I was just curious as to why it was here of all places. Beats me, she shrugged. These people were probably crazy or something. Must be why this place is abandoned now. Yeah, maybe, you agreed. But you still couldn't get the nagging feeling from earlier out of your mind. It does give me the creeps, though. We should leave her alone. Good idea. How about... In that moment, your senses spiked, and it was as if you knew that everything was going to go wrong. That everything could go wrong was about to. that everything that could go wrong was about to. Like when you wake up and you know you're about to have a shitty day. Right on cue, Anya jumped over to join your group. "Hey guys, what are you? Oh, pretty!" Before you could stop her, she reached out and grabbed the cloth at the torii gate, and barely tugging on it, immediately you felt your blood run cold, as a panic sweat broke out across your skin. Turning towards your companions, you knew they felt it from the terrified looks that gathered on their pale faces. A scream tore through the room. It was otherworldly, high-pitched, and ear-splitting. It's almost as if it tore right through you to the very core, grasping your soul in its tight grip with a ghostly chill. Then, as if summoned by the smell of fear, you saw something move in the corner of your vision. This time, there was no doubt about something being there. Slowly, ever so slowly, you turned to get a full view of the far side of the room. There, rising from the corner, was a figure, draped completely in shadow. It stood hunched away in an imaginary breeze. It turned what should have been its face towards you. You all stood frozen, too scared to move, as unblinking red eyes stared from the dark abyss, white teeth sharp as a steak knife, peeked out as it opened its mouth. With one shaky inhale of breath, it let out two simple words.
"Get out."
You didn't move, still too shocked of what you were seeing to move. That is, until it spoke again. This time, its voice was filled with power and rage. It seemed to shake the very foundation of the house as it screamed,
"Get out!"
And you were all scrambling towards the door, all too eager to get away from the floating entity. Unfortunately, you forgot that while you were indeed trespassing in a haunted shrine, it was also an haunted shrine, and as soon as you applied force to the floorboards beneath you, they crumbled right under the weight, letting your foot slip past as its jagged edges were cutting you on the way. "Wait, I'm stuck!" you cried out after the retreating figures of your friends. Both Anya and Gyoro were out, leaving only Mikasa to turn around at your call. Her eyes met yours, pleading, before focusing back on the figure that was still approaching the door where she stood. In that moment, you knew it was the same look your dog would give you before bottling to hide after being startled by some loud noise. It hurt so much worse than that, though, when, after one last look, she ran after the others, leaving you trapped and alone. The monster paused in its pursuit, staring at the door through which they had escaped, before turning its gaze towards where you were stuck. Then, on invisible legs moving under its black cloak, it began to ever so slowly make its way over to you. Frantically, you pulled at your foot, not caring about how many cuts you gained, nor how many nails you broke as you pried at the boards. Then, after a few adrenaline-fueled seconds, you managed to yank your foot out of the wooden trap. The creature was almost upon you now, as you frantically scrambled back in an attempt to put more distance between you. You hardly even noticed when you passed underneath the torii gate, blood smeared the polished wood. It was then that the creature jumped, teeth flashing and eyes blazing with the intent of ripping you apart. You raised your arm in front of you, prepared to sacrifice the limb in exchange for the rest of your life. Scrunching your eyes closed, you waited for the searing pain of teeth sinking into your flesh. Yet, it never came. Cracking open your eyes, you were met with, well, you weren't sure what you were looking at. It was almost as if the universe itself was in front of you. Swirling shades of purple and black swam before you, with some invisible force holding you above it all. Voices spoke, but no louder than whispers, fading in and out before you could gather what they had said. Had you died? Is this what the afterlife was like? If so, where was everyone else? Before you could get too far into your philosophical questioning, you felt a tug at your sleeve, yanking your arm back. You were shocked to see no one around. Spinning in a complete circle, you still found yourself completely alone. Right alone. Your eyes burned as you remembered back to the house they had just left you there. Only Mixa had even turned back, and even she had decided to leave you. Some friends they were. But still, if you had them then, at least you wouldn't be so afraid. You didn't even know where you were, which only made matters worse. Hello? Is anyone there? You called out tentatively. There was still a chance of the monster or creatures similar lurking around, and the thoughts of running into another one of them made you shiver. Please, I'm scared. I don't want to be alone. Your voice grew quiet as you realized just how hopeless of a situation you were in. Nobody was coming for you. You were going to be left here to die. Tears blurred your vision as you fell to your knees, giving into your emotions and letting them slide down your cheeks. Not like anyone was there to judge you. You stayed like that for who knows how long, crying as you contemplated life. Then, through your silent sobs, you heard it, a voice, one so quiet that almost thought you had imagined it, and then you heard it again and more clearly. This way. The voice was followed by a tug, just like the one earlier, and this time you did nothing to fight it, allowing the invisible force to pull you on through the dark mist of the abyss. Then, after a short while of walking, you saw it. A small dull light coming from one of the distant directions. You grew more excited and your pace quickened. That was it, the exit. At this point, you were all but running, excited to leave this whatever this place was. The closer you got, the more blinding the light became, up until you had to close your eyes against the harsh glare. Still, you continued on, and while the light gave you hope, it also took away your sight, which led to you not so gracefully tripping and tumbling forward head over heels. Groaning, you rubbed your backside that was definitely now bruised. Was there no end to the injuries you would gain today? God, your mother was going to kill you when she saw how banged up you were. At least the light was gone now. You realized as you rubbed your eyes looking around you, you saw that there were once again in the old shrine. The longer you looked, the more it dawned on you. The room was somehow fixed? Fresh paper had been placed over the window and blocked out in the moonlight, giving away a darker feeling. Sliding doors and cabinets that had been previously busted were now in perfect shape. Gone was the thick layer of dust that had thickly coated everything along with the musty smell of mold, replaced by an even thicker scent of incense and sage than before. Whatever, you needed to get out of here before that thing returned. There wasn't any time to worry about the sudden room renovations later. Limping across the room, you slid open the door with a small thud. Exiting out into the hallway, you saw that it wasn't the only room that had been fixed, but seemingly the entire building as well. The floor no longer creaked under your weight as you made your way down the deserted halls, using the wall for support. By the time you made it to your second juncture of halls, you were all but steaming with anger. Just wait until you get your hands on those three. There would be hell to pay for leaving you behind. You had half a mind to. Turning the corner, you almost tripped as you stumbled back. You weren't sure if your eyes were tricking you, or if you were having some horrible nightmare, but with the way your luck has been going, there was no guarantee on anything. Right around the corner were two of what you wanted to say were men, but that wasn't exactly the right term for them. They were standing in the hallway as if acting on some sort of guards. The one on the left was shorter and looked as if to be a cat wearing a kimono and a cloth over his head. He sat resting on his haunches, eyes peering into the darkness of the hall beyond. His partner was not so alert, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. He could have passed as human if not for the blue skin and shark-like teeth that poked out between thin lips, promising to rip anything that came near them to shreds. They spoke casually, thankfully not having noticed your presence yet. Yet, that is. I can't believe we got stuck with night shift again. This sucks, Catface groaned. He leaned against the wall with a huff and fabric covering his face floating in the air before settling back down. The man beside him just gave a shrug of his shoulders, uncaring. Hey, it's your fault. You're the one who tried to steal Chrono's dried fish from the pantry. I was just an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. As the men argued, you were ever so slowly making your way back from where you had come, moving as silently as you could across the floorboards. There was no real plan on where to go, but you sure as hell couldn't stay here with these two things. Say that all you want, but you're the one who told me where they were in the first place. Sharktooth cracked an eye open, grinning. I got in trouble for helping a friend. I hardly think that's... The wood under your foot let out a groan of protest as he stepped down on it. The space fell silent, and you prayed that they would think it was just some trick of the mind and brush it off. You saw the Catman's nose twitch. Once. Twice. Now whipping his head around. Bright green feline eyes locked onto where you stood, followed by his partner's solid black ones. So much for being sneaky. Abandoning all hope of not drawing attention to yourself, you turned and sprinted back the way you had come, trying to ignore the throbbing in your ankle as you went. Behind you, you heard scrambling and heavy footsteps as the guards came to their senses. A human? How did one of those get in here? Who cares? Catch it before it gets away. Shit, this wasn't good. There was no way you'd be able to outrun those two in the condition you were in. Not to mention, you didn't even know where you were going, as you randomly chose different halls at each intersection. God, this place was like a maze. Deciding that hiding was your best option, you made sure you were out of view of the two pursuers before choosing a door and praying that it was empty. Enter the room beyond and shutting the door as quietly as you could behind you. Doing a quick survey of the area, it looked to be something of a bedroom with a futon sitting in the corner, thankfully unused. Seeing a set of smaller doors on the wall, you quickly opened them and discovered a mostly empty closet. A cliché place to hide, but with the voices of the two men growing closer, you couldn't afford to be picky. Climbing in and shutting the door behind you, you peered out through a small crack you had left open. Your breath caught in your throat as you saw two shadows stop in front of the door, panting. Where'd it go? Shit, he'll kill us if it escapes. We can't let that happen. Go wake up the others. There's only so many places it could have gone. Right. And with that, they were off again, splitting off and going in different directions. Only when you were sure they were gone did you allow yourself to breathe again. What a situation you had gotten yourself into. Now, not only did you have monsters looking for you, but you were going to get reinforcements. If you made it out of this experience alive, it would be a miracle. Deciding it would be better idea to stay in your current hiding spot than run around the halls and risk running into someone else, you hunkered down between a couple extra blankets and steeled your nerves for the rest of the night. You stayed like that for what you could only assume was hours, hunched over and trembling. Despite the current situation, you felt your eyes become heavy with exhaustion. Thanks to all the excitement of the night, shaking your head, you tried in earnest to stay awake. You couldn't fall asleep when they were still searching. Every once in a while, you could hear footsteps racing by the room and shouts crossing the halls. The door had never been opened once, causing your heart rate to spike, the body to tense. But in the end, nothing ever came of it, as the person left soon after. The adrenaline could only last you so long, and you found your head bobbing, jerking back up the moment you caught yourself dozing. But surely a few minutes wouldn't hurt, right? You needed your energy to run after all. Moving a bit to get more comfortable, you snuggled into the blankets beside you, closing your eyes and wishing to just wake up and all of this to be a bad dream. It seemed like you had hardly closed your eyes when you were assaulted with light. Your arm instinctively went up to protect your eyes from the harsh glare, only to be ripped away as a large hand lashed onto your arm, easily encircling it. A cry left your lips as you were roughly dragged out of your hiding spot. Your body was stiff from being in the same position for so long, and you were sure your knees would have buckled if you could even touch the ground. As you were currently being held at least a foot in the air, and if you had thought the guards you had run into earlier had been freaky looking, then this guy took the cake. He stood taller than any person you had ever met, at least 7 feet tall, and was a wall of muscle. He wore nothing but old-fashioned harem pants and a black mask that curved into a beak. Dark red hair sprouted out in all directions from his head. Who would have thought I would find a little mouse hiding in my closet? The guys are going to die when they hear this. He began dragging you out of the room, ignoring your struggles as if you were nothing more than a bug. Still, you pried at the hands holding you above the ground, biting and scratching at any skin you could reach. Then it crossed your mind. These guys may not be human, but maybe the anatomy is similar? Winding up as much as you could, you drove your heel between its legs. He froze, and for a moment you assumed he had just pissed him off. Then, like a tree in the forest, he fell to his knees, letting go of your arm as he grabbed at the injured area. Storing that little bit of information away in the back of your mind, you scrambled to put distance between yourself and the groaning man. As you ran, you saw a flash of light from the end of the hall. It must be a door outside. With a new burst of energy, you flew down the remaining distance of the hall. All you had to do was get out of here. After that, you could play things by ear. By the time you actually reached the door, you were unstoppable, almost fully running as you practically ripped the door aside. But moving so fast made you impossible to stop. Your momentum as you exited the building onto the walkway outside, slamming full force into what felt like a wall of stone that threw you back. The force of being thrown causes you to slam the back of your head into a wooden frame. You had just run through and twisted your already sprained ankle, a whole new joint of pain coursing through your body. Dazed and disoriented, you groaned, rubbing and quickly forming bump on your head and pushed yourself up onto your elbows. So you must be the little human causing a ruckus. My whole schedule has been thrown off thanks to you. His voice cut through air like a knife, crisp and direct with an almost clinical feel to it. Like the person speaking thought they were better than everyone. Slowly you raised your gaze. There, illuminated in the light of the rising sun, was the most beautiful yet terrifying man you had ever seen. His eyes held no emotion, gazing down with a cynical glare like molten gold, overshadowed by neatly trimmed brown locks that looked so soft you wanted to run your hands through them, and from which purple feathers were weaved and hung. Pale skin spoke of his status, contrasting against his lips set into an expression of neutrality, and from under which poked a longness canines. He was dressed in traditional Japanese garments of varying shades of purple, green, and black, with accents of gold along the trim. All in all, a stunning man, almost godlike, and left you so stunned you almost forgot you had even been running in the first place. He didn't share the sentiments of awe, apparently, because with a turn of his heel, he was walking the way he had come. With his back to you, you saw what you assumed was a family crest embroidered spanning the entire back of his robe. Chrono, bring her. And like that, you were picked up for the second time in less than 12 hours, thrown over a shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Immediately, you started to struggle. You got away once after all, so there was no reason you couldn't do it again, right? Before you could once again place a well-aimed kick between the legs of another monster, you felt a sharp pain in your shoulder, and time seemed to move in slow motion. No, wait. It wasn't everything else that was moving in slow motion. You were the only one moving slowly. You watched as your clenched fist continued on its previous path towards the captor's back, moving at such a speed you knew it wouldn't do any damage if it even connected. You could only watch helplessly at the floor as the floor moved, and you were once again brought back into that hell house, brought deeper and deeper into its maze of hallways with every twist and turn. By the time you're finally starting to feel the effects of whatever it was that had been hit with By the time you were finally starting to feel the effects of whatever it was that you had been hit with wear off, you were stopped in front of one of the many wooden doors in this place. This one was slightly different, however. The wood was more polished, cared for, with thicker, more intricate paper covering the panels. Hearing the telltale sign of wood sliding on wood, you were unceremoniously tossed to the floor a second later, left to slowly rouse yourself from the previous slowed state. When you tried to get back to your feet, a firm foot was placed on your back and brought you to your knees, forcing your chest to the floor in a low bow. Wood bit into your skin and the joints of your knees popped as even more force was applied, making you squirm in an attempt to escape the crushing pressure. Know your place, human. You're before the head of Chisaki. Show some respect. Kai, remove your foot. Humans are much more fragile than us, and it would be a shame if you were to break it. This Kai was reluctant, keeping his heel dug into your spine a few moments longer before removing it with a final push. Still, even with the pressure removed, you remained low with your forehead touching the floor, partially in fear of what would happen if you looked up, and partially because you were scared as to what you would find if you looked up. Rise, human. Let me get a good look of you. The voice from before spoke, sounding worn with age, and you assumed that this was the head of the house speaking. Slowly, ever so slowly, you did as instructed, rising first to your knees, then shakily to your feet, where you placed most of your weight onto your injured leg. The entire time, where you placed most of your weight onto your uninjured leg. The entire time, you kept your gaze down, ignoring the whispering voices. Let us see your face. Your heart felt like it was about to seize, beating wildly with adrenaline, despite your best efforts to remain calm. Letting them know how scared you were would be a mistake, though you had no doubts that they already knew. Raising your head, you felt your body jolt as you met eyes with the man in front of you. He sat atop a raised platform on one of the fluffiest-looking mats you have ever seen. Behind him on the wall proudly stood what you could now confirm was the family crest, which was what appeared to be a flower. While his eyes were stern and authoritative in the way they gazed at you, unlike the man earlier, there was no malice or contempt hidden within them, only careful observance. Standing, he made his way over to where you stood in the center of the room with no difficulty and a strong stride despite his apparent age. Walking in a small circle around your frozen figure, he gave only a few sounds of thought as he inspected you more closely. Hands glided over your shoulders lightly before moving down to grip your upper arm and giving a light squeeze. He then moved onto your face, grabbing your chin and turning it every which way as he inspected your face, before doing the same thing to the rest of your body when his eyes glanced down to your feet. An eyebrow shot up as at the cuts from the floorboards and how you rested your weight on the opposite foot. Content with his observations, he returned to his spot at the head of the room, demons and monsters of all kinds flanking him and lining the walls of the room. No one spoke as he continued to stare, and you could feel your nerves growing more and more tense with every passing second of silence. Finally, he spoke. "I've decided. You're going to work here." Immediately, the room erupted into chaos as voices laughed over one another in a frenzy. "There's never been a human before. What if they're actually a spy? They won't last a week. Might as well eat them now and get it over with." Even the golden-eyed man from earlier, Kai, who had been sitting on the right of the old man, showed some form of surprise with his eyes, widening a fraction of an inch and glancing over at the man next to him. He let it continue for a couple of minutes, letting everyone get their opinions out of the air before raising his hand and immediately silencing the room. "This is the first human we've had that survived the trip here in a long time. And getting rid of them would be such a waste. They're hard workers once you get down to it, even if they don't last very long. Besides, after the last one died, I miss having one around. They bring so much life with them." You didn't know whether to feel concerned or comforted by his words, feeling like you were being compared to a pet of sorts, but as long as it meant they weren't going to kill you, you were all for this guy. It was at this moment Kai chose to speak up. "Sir, I more so than anyone else respect your views and decisions, but I can't help but feel as if this will bring more trouble than it's worth. This thing." His voice was filled with distaste as he gestured to where you stood, obviously not caring that you knew of his displeasure towards you. "Has already caused the shrine to fall into an uproar once, and I have no doubt they'll do it again." But the man chuckled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Like I said before, they're interesting creatures and quite entertaining if you let them be. My mind is already made up." He turned, addressing to the room as a whole once again. "They'll live here from now on, and if I find out they've been killed somehow, then the offender will be dealt with." A murmur of "Yes, sir," and "Yes, my lord," were all the responses he got before he waved his hand once again, dismissing them. Only Kai stayed by his side, shooting daggers from his eyes and made you flinch. Geez, you hadn't even done anything and this guy already hated you. "What's your name, young one?" he asked once the room was empty. For a moment, you didn't think you would be able to answer, throat tight with fear and as dry as the desert. After doing your best to give yourself somewhat of a chance, you managed to mumble, "Why, Yen?" Humming an acknowledgement, he snapped his fingers out of the darkness. A girl with short black hair, dressed in a traditional kimono, emerged. As if it weren't for the 2 extra sets of eyes on her face, you would have thought she was like any other girl your age. "Yona here will teach you all you need to know and show you what's to be expected on a daily basis." He looked over to Yona, who dipped into a deep bow. "Make sure they get settled and have the cut on their foot looked at. It would do me no use to have a lame servant." Yuna simply nodded her head before scurrying over to you, taking your hand and roughly pulling you behind her in the direction of the door. "Oh, and Effen." You looked back to your shoulder as he called to you, pausing in the doorway. "I would advise you to not try running away. Not all of those here are as kind as me, and I have no control over what would happen if you were to step outside this building." With a chilling message, you were tugged through the doorway, Yona not showing her pace whatsoever as you tried to keep up with her. You walked in silence, going down one hallway after another until you reached the destination, the servants' quarters. Upon entry, you were given 2 sets of clothes, one to be your night clothes and the other to be your everyday working outfit, which would be switched out once a week to be washed. You also received an assigned sleeping spot, one right next to Yona, the closest to the door. Only a few short minutes after you had gotten there, you assumed was the doctor arrived, a creature with red skin and many arms, which he used to inspect and clean your foot. After wrapping it, he instructed Yona, who had stood off to the side watching with crossed arms and a sour expression, that it was nothing more than a simple sprain and that a day's rest should be fine. After he left, Yona was quick to follow. I still have things to do. Don't die before I get back. With that, you were left alone, save for the occasional person that would come in to get something or take a short nap before their next task. Each time they entered, you could feel their eyes staring, but not once did any of them say a word. You were fine with their forced isolation, though, not even sure what you would say if they decided to talk to you. Your thoughts were instead filled with concerns about what was going on back home. Surely there were people growing worried about you. Your mom had been expecting you home that night, so what had she thought when you never returned? Even if she called the police, there was a slim chance of them finding you. After all, you weren't entirely sure how you had gotten here yourself, and you didn't think they would believe your friend's story about spirits and ghosts anytime soon. It had to have something to do with that Torii gate, though. You were sure of it. If you could just find where it was again, then maybe you could figure out a way to get back home. Your thoughts of concerns were broken up between periods where you fell asleep, more tired than you had originally assumed. It was from one of these naps that you were awoken jumping in panic and fearing that some other crazy monster had come to get you, only to find Yona dealing with a bowl of rice and some sort of mystery meat in her hands. Eat, it will help you recover quickly. Hesitantly, you took the bowl from her, staring curiously at the contents inside. The rice was familiar enough, but covering it was a meat you couldn't quite place, and thick green sauce which smelled suspiciously medicinal. Hey Yona, what exactly is this? Yona? Receiving no answer, you turned and saw that she was already under her covers, breathing as she supposedly slept. Clearly, you weren't going to get any answers from her, and you were half tempted to just ignore the dish. It was then that your stomach growled, reminding you that you hadn't eaten in the past 24 hours, and mystery meat or not, it was a lot better than starving. So with a deep breath, you hesitantly lifted a spoonful of the concoction to your mouth. As soon as it hit your tongue, you wanted to gag, the bitter taste assaulting your taste buds full force. The meat was no better, somehow dry and chewy at the same time, and made an awful combination with the bland rice. Still, you forced yourself to choke down every last spoonful, determined to get your energy back so you could get to looking for the gate as soon as possible. After finishing, you shoved the dish as far away as you could, laying back down facing the door in fear that someone would try to sneak up on you in the middle of the night. With all the sleep throughout the day, it was a surprise how tired you still felt, leading to a night of tossing and turning with nightmares as shadowy claws chased you through never-ending hallways, always catching you and dragging you back no matter how many times you escaped. Relief was only brought when you were awoken by Yona, face down from where she had flipped you over in the process of waking you. Honestly, if you want to survive, you mustn't be such a heavy sleeper. Miss one chore, and they'll have your head for sure, human or not. Now get dressed before we get behind schedule. She tossed her clothes in your face, already turning to leave. It was almost record-breaking how fast you slipped into one garment to the other, too scared of being left behind by the only person you were familiar with, to care about the stares of the others in the room who were also getting up and ready for the day. Following her, you were surprised at how well your foot already felt, not even twitching when you put pressure on it. You'll be acting as my number 2 from now on. Whenever I go, you go. Whenever I do, you do. And whatever I say, she glanced back, eyes briefly flashing red. You listen. Nodding in agreement, you entered what looked like a laundry room. Fabrics and clothes of all colors and sizes hanging above tubs of streaming water where others were already working. Pulling a few choice items from a pile of folded linens, she piled them into your arms before grabbing her own stack and leading you back out. For the next few hours, you were stuck to her side like glue, going in and out of random rooms and changing the futons and comforters in them, as well as taking the occasional load of clothing back to the washroom. You also had to clean these rooms, everything from scrubbing the floors to dusting. There was one room that Yona didn't allow you to enter, making you clean the floor in the hallway outside instead. At this point, your hands were almost raw. Sure, you were no stranger to cleaning, often doing most of the chores around the house with your mother, but this was a whole new level of its own, and the constant dripping of your hands in scalding water and continuously scrubbing with a brush had left your skin raw and peeling. Without a doubt, you would have calluses covering every inch of your skin by the end of the month. Trying to distract yourself from the ache in your hands, you hummed a song your mother had sung whenever she was cleaning the many scrapes and bruises you received growing up. So lost in your own world, you almost missed when he showed up. You almost didn't see him coming, almost as if he were purposely moving as quietly as possible in order to sneak up on everyone he encountered. There was no hiding that aura, though. It followed like a cloud, wrapping everything around him in a sense of fear and unease, and acting almost like a warning bell for whenever he approached. You may not have been here for long, but the memory of that feeling was something that you had come to associate with him after just 2 meetings. Your hair stood on end, and when you looked up from your spot on the floor, you were greeted with a sight you could have gone without. Kai was making his way towards you, somehow looking more annoyed than he had in the meeting. You fell into a deep bow, Yona having drilled the practice into you already this morning. Many see it as a form of respect. Nothing less than 90 degrees will do, she explained, after having you shoved your head down for the second time when a pair of kitsune had walked by, noses stuck in the air with their tails sashaying behind them. If you don't show them respect, they might decide that they need to beat some into you. And though you disliked him, it was clear that he was not one to mess with. So, swallowing your pride and resisting the urge to glare, you bowed low, forehead almost scraping the floor. As he grew closer, you could feel your body become more and more tense, expecting him to pass by and ignore you like the rest. He obviously found you to be, yet he didn't. When he came upon where you were knelt, he stopped, feet pausing in their previous rhythm. Neither of you said anything, and it crossed your mind that he might be trying to decide if he wanted to kill you or not. If he did, he was sure as hell taking his sweet time with it, leaving you a panicking mess as you resisted the urge to look up. Finally, he let out a short hum before turning and opening the door to the room Yona was in. "Shizaki-sama," you heard her gasp, following by the sound of brooms falling and the swishing of a fabric. "I was just finishing up. If I had known you were to return so soon, I would have done this earlier. Please forgive me." Taking a risk, you glanced up just in time to see Yona rushing from the room, arms full of cleaning supplies and dirty laundry. As soon as she was over the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her, pushing her forward and throwing the contents in her arm everywhere. "Ah, that was close," she groaned, rubbing her head. I thought I was a goner for sure. Her words surprised you. Sure, you could tell he was a grumpy person, and yes, he was a demon, but who would get so angry over someone cleaning? Noticing your stare, Yona jumped to her feet, dragging you alongside by the collar as she gathered everything once again. What are you still doing sitting around? We'll miss lunch if we don't get things done sooner. Her words filled you with new energy as you hadn't eaten anything since last night, and the prospect of food had you drooling. What you would do for a good vegetable tempura. Light crispy batter all ready to be soaked in soy sauce and mayo. Everyone here was clearly wealthy, so the food had to be great. Much better than the medicinal food you received last night. Now that you weren't recovering, they would give you something that actually tastes good. Or so you thought. Yona, you turned towards your guide, who was sitting next to you on the walkway with her legs swinging under the railing. The view was beautiful, giving a view of the surrounding forest, the hot spring that ran alongside the compound. That amazement couldn't be said for your lunch, though. It looked to be the same thing you had last night, but this time it was green and purple. Can't you see I'm trying to enjoy my food in silence? She glared your way, making you shrink further in on yourself. I was just wondering, well, the food. You hesitated, not wanting to offend the only person who was somewhat of a friend here by insulting the food of where she was from. It seemed you didn't have to say anything because after a pause she began laughing. Not in a happy, funny way, more of a cynical, oh, how stupid you are way. If you don't like the food, you better get used to it quickly. There's only 2 meals a day, and we get the same thing for lunch and dinner. If you don't want it, I'll take it off your hands. I've got no qualms about you starving. Already reaching for your bowl, you quickly yanked it away and set it on the other side, sighing as you looked out over the landscape. I just thought that since everything here was so nice that we might get something a little better than, this. Yona shook her head. Hate to break it to you, sweetheart, but yokai are greedy creatures. Just because Master has a lot of money doesn't mean he's going to spend it on it making sure his servants have great food. He has better things to do with it, and as long as we're living, he doesn't care how we feel about the taste of our rice. We're greedy creatures, and we'll do whatever we can to get what we want. You should have known that this was the case, but the way he had been so nice to you before had instilled a false sense of hope in you. Deciding it was better to move on to something else that was less depressing, you brought up what had been bothering you since the interaction with Kai earlier. Say, Yona, why were you so panicked earlier when Kai showed up? No sooner were the words out of your mouth when you were tackled to the ground. Yona above you, stalling your hips with a hand over your mouth. Do you have a death wish or something? Never say that name again. Nodding your head in agreement, the delicate girl let you up, removing her hand from your mouth and taking her spot back at the railing. Cautious from her earlier attack, you spoke once again. So, what's the deal with him? He always seems to be in a bad mood. I don't think I've ever seen him without a scowl on his face once. He's the young master next in line, and to take the spot as head of the Chisaki clan from Master. He's a clean freak with a real short temper, so it's best to stay out of his way. Thinking back, you remembered how panicked she had been when he had walked in on her finishing up cleaning. And here you thought your mom was strict about chores. Is that why you were so panicked earlier? Was that his room or something? Yes, I'm one of the only ones who can do it, anywhere near his standards, and sometimes even when I get in trouble for missing a tiny spot in the corner. There have been many to feel his wrath, much worse, so I suppose I'm lucky in a sense that I'm still alive. A chill ran down your spine as you were reminded you were literally around demons. He hasn't killed that many people, right? You were almost scared to ask, but the curiosity won out over common sense. Yona laughed in her joyless way once again, sending you a sly look. You know why we call him the Crow Demon. It's because wherever he goes, there's bound to be bodies. Now you are burning with questions, almost all of them about Chisaki. But it was at that moment the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The second part of your day was the same as the first, following Yona around and cleaning various rooms, the halls, looking out for approaching nobles and staying out the way. Just like Yona had said, that night's dinner was the same green mystery as the night before. All the manual labor had left you starving, and you downed the bitter concoction without complaint. The taste was still lingering in your mouth by the time you went to bed that night, bone tired and barely enough energy to change into your sleeping clothes as you collapsed on top of your blankets and fell into a dreamless sleep. The days quickly began to blend together, and your hopes of escaping began to whittle down to nothing. You had been all over the place with Yona by now, always keeping an eye out for the room with the torii gate, but there was never even a glimpse of it. Yona brushed it off to the side when asked about it, saying in all her years working here she had never seen such a thing. You saw many different yokai while being out and about as much as you were. Their features ranged from almost human to nightmarish monstrosities, some as small as mice and others as large, so large they couldn't even fit into the building. For the most part, they were harmless, the occasional one giving you a double take, but they feared the master's rage if they were to actually kill you. Yona became a sort of drunk aunt and acted as your guide for the first few weeks, evolving into something akin to a friend. Even when it got to the point where you could have started going off on your own to finish your chores faster, you stayed by her. She was like some great force among you all, always knowing how to deal with unruly yokai and plowing forward in her task. You had seen her throw multiple sacks of grain over her shoulders like nothing when you worked in the kitchen. It was almost impossible to think of her as anything other than an unstoppable, which was why it came to such a shock when you woke up to find her with a burning fever and unable to get out of bed. I have to get everything done. They'll kick me to the streets if I don't finish my duties, and then I'll be good as dead. She struggled against you and your attempts to keep her laying, telling how weak she actually was because on a normal day, this woman would throw you over her shoulder without a second thought. No, what you need is rest. I'll take care of everything. It hurt your heart to see Yona so weak and unlike herself, pushing herself with just delay how long it takes to get better. What? You can't even go anywhere without clinging to my side, she laughed, as the blush rising to your face and a return was sent into a coughing fit. Whatever. You fought the embarrassment of her words and pulled the blanket higher on her shoulders, standing and dusting off your knees and made to leave. There's no better time to learn than the present. FN. Pausing in the doorway, you glanced back and saw Yona staring at you with concern. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise, sending her your best reassuring smile and waved as you headed off to complete the ever-growing list of work. It was odd not having someone to talk to, even if all she did was listen as you rambled on. Being by yourself brought a whole new level of eeriness to the place. You thought you knew well. Even with your fear, you still couldn't slack on your duties unless you wanted to be reprimanded by Chrono, who headed the entire service force. It was a slow go of things. Work that was normally done by 2 people now carried by 1. Keeping on track required a brutal pace, and there wasn't one moment where you weren't rushing or running. The real challenge had yet to come. Taking a deep breath, you adjusted the cleaning supplies in your arms and stepped into the most important task of the day, Kai Chisaki's room. You had never been in here before, always left to do another task while Yona made sure the place was sparkling, not a speck of dust to be found. Now it was your turn. The room itself was already very clean, and for the most part boring. With him being the next head of the clan and all, you would have thought that his personal quarters would have been a bit more extravagant. Not to say it was unimpressive by any means, gods no. It was bigger than the entire servers' quarters, with shelves lining the walls. Holding scrolls after scroll, an elephant platform sat in the middle of the room, holding a futon of the finest cotton with many layers of cushion. Covered by silk comforters filled with goose feathers, to one side of the doorway you knew to lead to the other room next door, his office. A smaller desk sat before the window facing the west of his personal use. You got to work, first dusting every inch of the room with both the cloth and duster, while moving every object and getting every nook and cranny. Next was the window and furniture. Wetting your cloth with scented soap and water, you scrubbed every surface until your hands cramped, and repeated the process with the floor. Lastly was the futon itself. Yona had always carried these herself, mentioning how particular the Kai was about wrinkles. So when you touched them yourself, you were almost taken back at how soft they were. You knew they were the best quality, but after sleeping with nothing but the coarse and scratchy wool blankets all the servants used, it felt like the clouds themselves were weaved into the fabric. It took you much longer than it should have to change out the sheets, letting the fabric slip through your fingers and allowing your knees to rest on the plush cushions for a moment longer than you should have. When you finished laying the new comforter, a royal purple, over the freshly aired futon, you could not help it when your body seemed to move on its own, laying down on the clean sheets. Just as heavenly as you imagined it to be, your eyes slipped shut as the running of the day caught up to you. You could have fallen asleep and never woken up again and still be happy. You could have, and you almost did, but an agonizing, familiar presence flooded your senses. Jumping to your feet, it wasn't a moment later when the door slid open, revealing a man you had put so much effort into avoiding all this time. Kai stared with the same look of annoyance he always had, eyes scanning over the room with rapt intent, taking in every detail until landing on you. Those eyes burning with uninterest and contempt, it made you shudder. Forgive me, young master. I'm leaving now, you bowed, collecting the old blankets as he did. Where's the other girl? His voice was monotone as he spoke. For a moment you weren't sure if it was a question directed at you or one he was asking to himself. She is feeling unwell, sir. He said nothing and stepped further into the room, head scanning as he did so, while you remained frozen on the ground, walking around the room. Your panic swelled as he got closer. Still you remained kneeling, wanting to flee but unable to feel your legs. Eventually he stopped before you, his elevated geta the only thing you could see. It might have been your imagination, but the murderous aura he carried like a shroud seemed different than normal. Leave. His words knocked you out of your stupor, sending a jolt of electricity through your body and sent you running. You left the breakneck pace all the way until the moment you reached the washroom. Only then did you allow yourself to pause, leaning up against the wall, taking deep and greedy breaths while trying to calm your racing pulse. It felt like you had just escaped death itself, and in a sense, you had. The lunch bell went off, scaring you once again. Along with all the others, you rushed to get your less than desirable bowl of whatever, and grabbing Yona's as well. When you made it back to the room, she was already awake. Sitting upright on her blankets and waiting expectantly. "I guess I'm the royalty now," she joked. As you handed her the bowl, amusement turned to a concern when you only nodded in response, unlike your normal self that would have snapped back. "Is everything all right? You seem kind of off." You paused, unsure if you should tell her. Causing her stress would only harm her rest out. "I ran into him." Your voice was barely above a whisper, but she still heard, rolling her eyes. "You're going to have to be more specific. There's a lot of hims here. Was it Mimic? I know you don't like him. Or maybe Chrono. Don't tell me he caught you slacking off. If I told you once, I've told you a million times. Kai Shizaki." She was silent for a beat, and you thought she might have actually died. "What?" Grabbing your shoulder and spinning you around, she ignored your complaints and forced you to look her dead in the eye. Her tone was dead serious as she spoke. "Tell me right now. Tell me what happened. Right now." Sighing, you went through everything that had happened upon entering the room, opting to leave out the part about laying on the bed, as she would have killed you for such a blatant disregard of rules. Nodding along the entire time, she seemed more relaxed as he finished. "Sounds like he was just inspecting the room. If he let you go, then it means you should be fine," she sighed, handing you her bowl and falling back onto her bed. "I'd recommend getting started on the afternoon task, or else you might not finish until dawn." You scoffed. "All right, little Miss Lazy, I'll get started on our chores." Yona ignored the blatant insult, waving you off and going back to her previous endeavors in Dreamland. Being much more careful than you had this morning, you once again threw yourself into finishing the list of things to do for the day. Yona would owe you big time, that's for sure. Finishing up the last thing needed before you could crawl into the sweet embrace of your bed, you paused when you spotted Chrono approaching. Dropping into a bow, you waited for him to pass by. It took you by surprise when you felt a hand grab your arm, forcing you to drop the scrub brush you were harshly pulled along. "Sir, what's going on? What did I—" "Silence," he cut you off, pulling harder. "Your presence has been requested." "What? By who? For what?" Ignoring your question, he continued to drag you behind him, and the longer you walked, the more you recognized your surroundings. "If your hunch was right, then you should be right about— shit." Struggling against the grip of the purple-haired man before you, it was no use, and soon you found yourself being thrown through the doorway of an all too familiar room. With winter approaching, it was already dark by this time, light coming from a dozen candles that flickered with every breeze, slim shoulders illuminated in warmth. Kai sat with his back facing you, while slender hands wrote delicate letters on the table before him. Chrono approached, leaning down and speaking slowly before taking a position against the wall. Not once did he pause in his work, continuing to scribble on a paper in front of him and leaving you to sweat in the silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he laid the brush down in its holder. Taking a deep breath and exhaling, he stood and turned to face you. There was a breath of silence before he spoke. "Not just anyone cleans my room and lives. Unlike all the other dim-witted yokai here, I have a certain level of expectancy that few can achieve. So tell me, taking a step closer, the hairs on the back of your neck stood on end as his voice grew darker. How did some filthy human manage to do so? You racked your brain looking for an answer to give him or tricks hidden within his words. One slip-up, and he would show no hesitance in killing you. My mother was always strict about chores. She liked it when things were clean. You managed to stutter out before trembling lips. A woman with sense, I see. I assume she also taught you everything else there is to taking care of a home, correct? How to cook, how to make tea, and wash and fold laundry? Yes, young master. You could feel his cold gaze as you trembled under watchful eyes. With a twirl of his robe, he turned to a spot at the desk and picked up the brush once more as he began to write. From now on, you become my personal servant. His words came without warning, taking a minute to process what he had said before your body went rigid. He was kidding, right? There was no way he actually intended for you to take on such a position. He hated humans. Surely he wouldn't want one near him so often. You will clean all my spaces, including my personal chambers and office, serve me all my meals and fetch me tea, and wash all my laundry. Wherever I am, you'll be. Be it morning, noon, or night. You will come at my beck and call. Is that understood? Gritting your teeth, you resisted the urge to argue. You didn't want to be around this man to begin with, and now you were his personal little errand person. There was nothing you could say, though. He was the young master, and you were a mere human servant. Yes, young master. I expect you to be waiting outside my door with breakfast in hand at 6 a.m. Don't be late. Dismissed. With one last bow, you rose on shaky legs and made your way back to the servants' quarters. Yona was going to die when she heard this. That night, after everyone had gone to rest in their chambers, Kai himself turned in for the night, an unusual occurrence for the demon who often stayed awake late into the night, working on paper or after paper and diligently keeping everything in order. Tonight, though, he had something to look forward to. Careful not to crease the fabric, he pulled back the covers and climbed into his futon. Once he was settled, he closed his eyes, inhaling the scent you had unknowingly left all over his sheets earlier. A scent he couldn't get enough of, acting like a drug and dulling his senses while allowing his mind to wander. Wander it did, back to the way you kneeled earlier, trembling before him as you spoke, the way your lips parted and formed every word, how your eyes remained lowered, occasionally darting around and betraying your panic while hidden under delicate lashes. Your hair did nothing to hide your face, allowing him to read you like an open book, if your posture hadn't already told him everything he needed to know. You were so fearful, so submissive, so perfect. It disgusted him to see you in such shabby clothes, delicate hands soiled and dry from lack of care. It would be over soon, he had decided from the moment he walked upon you, bathed in the light of the sun coming from the open windows, illuminating your form and making you appear almost as a goddess while humming to yourself as he cleaned, a melody soft yet haunting. Even now, he could still hear it in the back of his mind. He fought with himself at first, unable to accept the fact that he had such unfamiliar feelings towards a filthy human no less. But no matter where he went, your scent seemed to cling to him. It prompted him to follow you. Learning more and more as you went about your task in blissful ignorance of your stalker. Yes, soon you would be his. Then he could live out all the fantasies he wanted. Just as you had imagined, working directly under the young Tasaki was hell. If you had thought your chores before had run you ragged, they were nothing compared to what you were doing now. You were constantly running back and forth doing daily chores required by him, such as the usual cleaning of his laundry. On top of that, he was always ordering you to do one thing or another, be it fetching new water if his tea became the slightest bit cold, or waking you up in the middle of the night to fetch him more ink from his cellar. Your free time in the evenings was taken away as he enrolled you in shamisen lessons just so you could play for him whenever he wanted. The first few times of which were filled with insults as he pointed out every wrong note and discounted tempo. You worked hard at it, and eventually his jabs quieted, content with listening to the melodies you produced as he worked. Time spent with Yona was cut almost to none, restricted to when you saw each other in the halls and talking in hushed voices at night while everyone slept. It was the only time you were away from the golden eyes of Chisaki, and you cherished every minute of it. Foolishly enough, you thought it would last when the reality your days together were already numbered. "My lord, I'm here with your breakfast." You waited a moment, a short pause of silence before you heard him give permission to enter. When you walked into his room, he was in the same spot he was every morning, sitting at his desk with a book, brush, and paper in front of him. Moving said object aside, you were given space to set up the tray which held his breakfast in front of him. The sight of the steaming miso broth and crisp salmon sitting next to maple-soaked tofu had your mouth practically watering. The smell alone was almost enough to set off your stomach, which hadn't been filled since lunch yesterday. Missing dinner thanks to Chisaki insisting you get on your hands and knees to clean under every piece of furniture in his office. It was still hours until lunch would be served, though, so biting your lip, you focused on pouring his tea before beginning your routine of cleaning. You started in his office, knowing that's where he would be heading after breakfast to continue his work. You had no more than started wiping everything down when your stomach began to groan, calling out for food, and quite loudly at that. Pushing a fist into the disobedient organ, you tried to keep it from making any more noise as you continued to work. There was no stopping its cries, however, and they continued to grow increasingly louder all the while. You tried to ignore the sharp pain and nausea that came along with them. "Little mouse," you jumped at the sound of his voice from the other room, cringing at the nickname he had given you. Just another demeaning thing he insisted on calling you, rather than your name or even a simple servant, which would have been more preferable. This just made you feel like some kind of pet, and you had the suspicion that the name came from the fact of how weak you were compared to everyone else in the building, combined with how filthy he found you. Dropping your things, you returned to his room, bowing. A glance at his plate showed he hadn't touched anything yet, despite having chopsticks ready in hand. Was there a problem with the food? He had never complained about it before. "What is it that you request, young master?" Turning slightly, he beckoned you over. Taking a step closer, you were surprised when he mentioned for you to come closer still. By the time you had stepped close enough for his satisfaction, you were right next to him, almost touching. The proximity made you nervous, as the only people who ever got this close to him were never alive for much longer. Motioning for you to kneel, you did so, mind spinning for what he could possibly want. "The food, has it been tested?" His question came out of the blue. The only time food was tested before any of the nobles who ate it was when it was prepared by someone other than the head chef. For him to ask that now would be a stupid question, though you would never tell him that. "I'm sorry, sir. I did not know you had wanted it done. I can fetch the tester at once and—" "No need," he cuts you off, stopping you mid-rise. "But, sir, I thought you said you wanted it tested. You were generally confused on what to do. Did he want it tested? Did he want it tested or not? How dim are you? By the time you got back, my food would be cold and unenjoyable. That's what I have you here for. Wait, he expected you to do it? What if it was actually poisoned? Sir, you stuttered out. I don't think I should. His brow went high in surprise, head tilting to the side. Oh, so you would rather have me poisoned? Not at all. Frantically waving your hands in front of you, you tried to think of a way out. This is an order from me. Refusing means disobedience, and disobedience means punishment. Would you rather that? His eyes narrowed, and while it would have been your imagination, you could have sworn there was a tone of hope, excitement laced under his words. Shoulders dropping, you gave up. No, sir. Good. Turning to his plate, he picked up a piece of salmon with his chopsticks and held it before you. Open, he ordered. You did so, allowing him to place the food of fish in your mouth. As soon as it touched your tongue, flavor exploded all across your taste buds in such a way that it was almost painful. After weeks of having nothing more than bland rice and bitter sludge, the taste was as well as prepared piece of meat. The taste of such a well-prepared piece of meat was like a bomb. Closing your eyes, you let out a small moan as you savored it. You instantly regret your actions as you felt Chisaki stiffen. I'm sorry, sir. Your first burned with embarrassment. God, how could you make such a noise in front of him? It just slipped out. He didn't react how you expected, blinking twice before his body relaxed once again. To be expected, it must taste better than what the kitchens serve. Yeah, it's not the greatest. The words were out of your mouth before you knew it. It seemed like you truly did have a death wish today. I mean, you quickly corrected yourself, hoping he would let it slide. Master is kind to provide us with food and shelter. Anything he gives us, we accept gratefully. Shizaki was silent, looking at his food in thought once again. I can see it's fine. You may return to your work. Thankful for your dismissal, you were quick to rush back to the office and continued on with your duties. The entire time, the taste of the salmon remained in your tongue like a haunting memory, reminding you of something you would never have again. Then lunch came around. The taste you had grown used to came back full force, putting you further into depression. When you returned to the kitchen and grabbed Chizaki's lunch, you were all the more tempted to sneak a piece, hardly able to restrain yourself. Turns out there was no need, as the practice from earlier was repeated. Chizaki, having you taste his food, gazed carefully, watching for any signs of distress before dismissing you. It continued for 2 weeks, evolving from him having to taste his foods to being allowed to eat what was left over as well, claiming it would just create unnecessary work and food waste for the kitchen. Chrono had almost exploded upon finding out. You expect me to walk around with someone who looks to be on the verge of death. What would that say about the Chizaki house? Their condition has improved along with their performance. Besides, look at this. He grabbed a strand of your hair-colored locks, twisting it between his fingers as he examined them. Much healthier looking, still a bit dirty though. The next day, you were put on a daily bath at Chizaki's insistence, as well as given new clothes of finer material, matching closer to his own robes. In all this time, you noticed him becoming more invasive of your personal space. Touches were still rare, but often he would sit far closer than any normal person would to a servant, insisting to stay by your side whenever you weren't specifically doing something. There were times where the boundaries were pushed even further, bordering on creepy. The other day, you had been reaching for a book on the top shelf, reaching on your toes as high as you could with your fingers barely scratching it. Just as you had been about to give up, you felt something, or rather someone, bruising up against your back. It had been Chisaki, reaching above you to grab the high item, sandwiching you between his own body and the shelf. The heat of his skin seeped through his clothes and into your own, almost burning with how high the Ani's temperature ran. Lean muscles stretched under soft silks as he stretched, pausing a moment before bringing his arm back down. His breath tickled the nape of your neck as he spoke, sending goosebumps racing along your skin. Foolish little mouse. It's almost like you're trying to show me how helpless you are. Book in hand, he headed back to the desk. Similar encounters followed, putting you on edge and left you anxious about the next time it would happen. You should have taken notice, recognized the signs before it was too late, but you didn't. Too occupied with staying alive and working around Chizaki's mood swings and increasing possessiveness. The worst was still yet to come. FN, correct? Looking up from the tray you had been loading with a kettle and cup for Chizaki's afternoon tea, standing in the doorway and blocking your exit was a guard, and you had seen walking about before. His towering figure and beaked mask hard, making it hard for him to blend in with the elegant interior of the shrine. I don't think you remember me. My name is Rappa. It took you a moment, mind searching for some way you could possibly know this man. A faint memory burned in the back of your mind, right on the cusp of being brought back from whatever long-term storage it was in. Then it hit you. You're the man who found me that first day. Jumping back, you watched him cautiously. Why was he here now? Had he come back for revenge? But why now? He had plenty of opportunities to do so when you had been in the halls alone and completely helpless. Hey, calm down. No hard feelings about you know that. He flinched, hand coming down to cover himself at the memory. You won fair and square. So, what do you want? Well, normally I would ask for a rematch and we would fight until I won. But I don't make it a habit to fight women, especially mortal ones. Glancing at his hands, you saw how large they were, how easily they could wrap around your neck and snap it like a twig. One hit, hell, even a flick, you would be down for the count. But if he wasn't here to fight, then what did he want? As if reading your mind, he spoke once again. You've gained the attention of Chisaki. He treats you differently than the rest. I want to know why. So, it wasn't just your imagination. His words confirmed it. Now you were left with the same question as him. Your guess is as good as mine. I honestly thought the man hated me. Picking up the tray, you made your way to the exit before the water got cold, and you were sent back again. As you approached Rappa in the doorway, he stepped aside, letting you pass. Before you could get far, he stopped you, placing a hand on your shoulder, prompting you to turn around. You're different from the other humans I met. You've earned my respect. If you ever need anything, just let me know. Giving you a squeeze, he turned... I lost my place. Giving you a squeeze, he turned and walked away. His hulking frame disappeared around the corner and out of sight. Shaking the honest of the encounter from your mind, you returned once again to the room of the tormentor. He was still at his desk, sitting just as he had been when you left, and still writing. It was a miracle he didn't have arthritis, if a yokai could get such a thing. You approached, letting your foot hit the wooden step to alert him of your presence. Kneeling beside the table, you poured his tea and set it within arm's reach. When you went to retract your hand, however, you were stopped as his own reached out and grabbed your wrist. There was hardly time to be surprised, let alone react, as he pulled you across the table, spilling the cup of scalding liquid you had just poured and burning your skin as he pulled you into his lap. "Young master, what are you—" Silence. His voice was low and threatening, almost seething and locking your jaw shut in fear. He yanked at the collar of your robe, making you flail in panic. Instantly, you found yourself on your stomach, wind knocked out of you from the force and speed of his movements as you processed how you'd been flipped onto the ground, with Chisaki now on top of you. His legs spread on either side as he rested on your lower back, his hand gripping your wrists together painfully. Still struggling, you froze with fear as you felt his free hand grip your neck, nails lightly scratching your skin as he yanked your head roughly to the side. Burying his face into the juncture of your neck, he took in deep breaths like a dog picking up a scent. "Why do you smell like someone else?" His voice was too calm for the current situation, putting more fear in your system as you realized how pissed off he truly was. "Rappa," you gasped out while trying to gain more air through his constricting grip. "I ran into Rappa in the kitchen while I was fetching your drink." Wrong answer. His grip grew tighter as he pressed your face further into the floor. If he didn't let up soon, you were going to pass out from either lack of oxygen or fear, whichever came first. "And you allowed him to touch you, knowing full well you belonged to me?" "I'm sorry, master. I'm sorry. I won't let it happen again." You were almost crying at this point, tears swimming and blurring your vision. Not that there was much to see from your current position. It seemed your begging had done it for the sadistic bastard, as he let up on your neck, allowing you to breathe. Taking greedy gulps of air into your burning lungs, you could feel Chisaki shift above you. "It's my fault for being too lenient with you. I should have known you would need more training." Not to worry, though. The shift of fabric could be heard as he shuffled through his robe, ignoring your struggles. "This should do it." Once again, you felt pressure around your neck, but this time it wasn't the warmth of skin, but the cold brush of metal. There was a small click, and you were relieved of the weight pinning you down. Scrambling away, you tried to put as much distance between yourself and the monster as you could. Keyword, tried. You got no more than 6 feet, and there was a small twang before the collar around your neck tightened and you were pulled back. Right back to his feet. "What did you—" Desperately, you tried to pull it off, only to be rewarded with a shock, and not a small one either. All the while, his face remains impassive, watching it scramble to escape over and over, only to be pulled back or rewarded with a shock. "Congratulations, you've been promoted to my new pet. You will never leave my side unless I allow it. You will sleep, eat, even breathe by me. I will not allow any of the dirty vermin here to corrupt you more than they have. I must already cleanse you of their filth as it is." You ignored him, continuing to struggle. He sighed. There truly was still much for you to learn. "It's infused with its own magic, allowing me to control how far the leash and every time you get shocked, try to run, and it will pull you right back to me. And as you've already learned, any attempt to tamper with it will result in a shock." Kneeling down, he grasped both of your hands in one, tilting your chin and forcing you to look him in the eye, those cold, paralyzing eyes of gold. Eyes that watched like a predator. You're my little mouse, now and for all eternity." "Go to hell," you spat, the last of your fight leaving your body. "Have you forgotten?" He pulled you closer, yanking your hair and watching your eyes widen in fear, teeth gently scraping the soft skin of your neck as he spoke. "We're already here."
Hello
everybody, this is Coffee. Today I read on an Ani Yandere Overhaul ex-listener by BNHAE Writings on Tumblr. It is titled You're Mine. I just made that title up, to be honest, but I hope you all enjoy this video. This is the outro because I couldn't do the intro. My editing app won't let me put this in the front, so I have to. This is my third time recording the outro, but I'm supposed to be asleep right now, so that's why I'm talking really low. I hope you all enjoyed this video. It took me a very long time to record, and I am still in the process of editing it. So I would really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, I'll see you all next time. Love y'all, bye.